All right, folks, this is Kevin, aka Title Dragon, back with another episode of Fic Night. For those of you who don't know, uh, Fic Night is a monthly feature done by all of us at hpfanfictalk.com, a website both for the Harry Potter fandom as well as other fiction fandoms, where we have both a forum for authors to participate and an archive for authors to post their stories, including original fiction. And Fic Night's featured stories actually come out of participating in both of those areas of our community. Authors who post their stories on the archive, who are also members of our forums, can put their stories up for nomination. And this month, we actually, in honor of the end of 2018, had two stories that our members voted on. It was a very close vote between them, and I believe it was about 6 or 7 other stories where these two stories came out on top. We are going to have, uh, starting the first story written by 1917 Farm Girl, uh, which is called Yes, Ginevra. There is a Santa Claus, which is sort of a timely holiday themed story by one of our Gryffindor authors. And then the next story that we will read is 6 segments of a satsuma by Aphoride. The way that we'll do the double feature, because we are waiting on one of our authors to join us, and the other unfortunately couldn't make it this afternoon, is we're going to go ahead and read Yes, Ginevra, There is a Santa Claus first. And then our hope is that after jumping in with some commentary on that one and reading 6 segments of a satsuma, we will hopefully be able to bridge the potential time zone gap to have a live Q&A with Aphoride. Otherwise, I will jump back in with some commentary on that story. Feel free, as always, to hop in on our live chat and shoot us some questions that you have about the story. If you've got questions about the story and you want to see the stream as well, that's probably the best place to be. You can also tweet questions at us and our social media team as well at our Twitter account, which is at HPFanficTalk. And I do my best to keep up with all of those and all these different windows, and go ahead and get them answered either by our authors if they do become available, or I'll try to answer them as best I can. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with Yes, Ginevra, There is a Santa Claus by 1917 Farm Girl. Mummy, Mummy, look! Bill Weasley couldn't help looking up from his breakfast of wand Wheaties when his little sister streaked into the kitchen and up to their mother, squealing with delight. Look, Mummy, she repeated, practically bouncing up and down with excitement and thrusting a colorful catalog at their mother. Ginny, dear, what is it? His mum asked with a smile, wiping her hands on her apron and turning from the Christmas biscuits she was rolling out to face her daughter. Daddy said I could get the post today, and this was in it. She held up the brightly colored catalog once more, and this time Bill could make out the words on the front, despite his little sister's bouncing. Tabitha's Terrific Toys. And what's got you so excited about an old catalog, sweetheart? Look, Jenny cried for the 3rd time. She pointed with one finger to a picture. A dollhouse. The windows light up, and the flue really works, and it even comes with its own little house elf. His mother took a moment to study the picture. Yes, Jenny, it's very nice, she said appreciatively to the excited girl. That's what I want for Christmas, Jenny declared happily. Bill watched his mother's face fall instantly. He glanced over at Charlie, who was sitting next to him, and shared a look. Their family had never been exactly rolling in gold, but it had been a particularly hard year. Their dad had been injured at work at the beginning of the summer and had been forced to take several months off to recover. He'd been back for a while now, though he still walked with a slight limp, but the months without pay had done serious damage to the family's already meager savings. With the two of them and Percy all attending Hogwarts and the little ones at home to take care of, he knew his parents were barely scraping by. Christmas this year was going to amount to whatever homemade and hand-me-down treats his parents could put together. There was simply no way there was money for the wonder that had caught Ginny's eye. "Oh, Ginny, love," his mother sighed, crouching so she was eye level with her 7-year-old daughter. "You know Daddy and I can't get big fancy gifts this year." Her voice was incredibly sad, and it tore at Bill's heart, seeing his mom have to explain to his baby sister why she couldn't have nice things like other little girls. But Ginny seemed unaffected. "I know, Mummy," she cried happily. "That's all right. I'm gonna ask Santa." She flashed a dazzling smile at her mother and then skipped to the drawer by the sink. Humming slightly, she pulled out parchment, scissors, and a roll of speller tape, which she bundled into her little arms with the catalog and then took off up the stairs to her room. His mother stood back up and leaned against the counter, a completely crestfallen look on her face as she watched her daughter go. "You know, you don't have to get us anything if it would help," Bill spoke up quietly, breaking the silence. "Yeah, Mom, we're completely cool with no presents this year," added Charlie. She looked over at her teenage sons and gave them a watery smile. "Thank you, boys," she said, walking over behind them and wrapping an arm around each of them. "But that wouldn't make any difference." She ruffled their hair affectionately. "I'll be right back," she sniffed, her voice wobbly. "Watch the dough for me. Keep Ron and the twins from sneaking it," she said, and then left for the loo in a bit of a hurry. Bill had a sneaky suspicion why she was going, and it made his heart ache even more. "Well, this is a fine mess," said Charlie after a moment, standing up and dumping his empty cereal bowl in the sink. "What a way for Jen to learn the truth about Santa." Bill nodded grimly, his thoughts full. Ginny was the youngest of 7, all older brothers. Girl had never had anything new in her life. She had the twins' old clothes and Ron and Percy's old toys. She read his old books and even slept in Charlie's old bed. Their mom had become an expert at redesigning spells, but you could only transfigure clothes and toys and such so many times before they never quite lost their frayed look. But it was more than that. Ginny was a little girl. She hadn't cared when she was very young that all the things she had were originally meant for boys. But she was 7 now, age when girls started wanting girly things. Her friends all had dolls and tea sets and dress-ups they played with. Ginny was tough as nails, growing up with 6 big brothers, but she was still a little girl. He hadn't actually thought, until her excited plea a few moments ago, Ginny might like those things too. Lost in thought, Bill stood and put his own dish in the sink, mulling over the idea that had just popped into his head. "Hey, Charlie," he said suddenly to his brother. "Hmm? Find Percy and meet me in our room in about 20 minutes, okay?" "Why?" asked Charlie, puzzled. "Just do it, okay?" Charlie shrugged, sipping a handful of their mother's biscuit dough from the counter and stuffing it into his mouth. "Okay, mate," he said thickly around his mouthful. "Whatever you say." "Thanks," replied Bill, and then he took off up the stairs, stopping at Ginny's door. It was slightly open, but he knocked anyway. "Come in," his little sister called out happily. He pushed the door open and walked inside. She was lying stretched out on her stomach on the floor, legs swinging in the air as she taped a cutout picture to a piece of parchment. "What you making, Ginger?" he asked, using the nickname he'd given her at birth. He sat down on the edge of her bed. "This is my letter to Santa," she said proudly, holding it up for him to see. It was written in red crayon with the cutout picture of the dollhouse taped to the bottom. "See, I even gave him a picture so he wouldn't get confused." "That's really good, Ginny," What are you going to do with it? Post it, silly, replied Ginny with a roll of her eyes at her dumb big brother. Bill laughed. Yeah, I guess that's the logical thing to do with a letter. Why don't you let me post it for you? I've got to send a letter anyway. Thanks, Bill, she cried, rolling to her feet. She folded the letter with utmost care and handed it to him. Then wrapped her arms around his neck and gave him a tight hug. You're the best big brother in the world. Bill laughed again, hugging her back. Don't let any of the others hear that or they might get jealous. She pulled back and made a locking motion over her lips. Solemn secret, she said firmly. Solemn secret, repeated Bill, locking his own lips. He tugged her ponytail lightly, causing her to squeal just a bit, and then stood up. Don't worry, Ginny. I'll make sure Santa gets this, he said, waving the folded letter. She gave him a happy, slightly toothless grin, and then he slipped from the room. 30 minutes later, Bill, Charlie, and Percy were assembled in the elder two's bedroom, draped lazily over furniture. The meeting had been delayed slightly when Bill sent them back out to round up all their pocket change, and now the other two were staring at him rather curiously. All right, dump it all here in the middle of the bed. Let's see what we've got. Charlie obeyed without protest, but Percy crossed his arms and glared with a glare that shouldn't have looked so at home on a 12-year-old's face. Why? He demanded, holding tightly to his little bundle of coins. Because Santa needs a little help this year, and we're going to give it to him, Percy. What are you talking about? Asked Percy, exasperated. You think I still believe in Santa? No, Perce, but Ginny does, and if you just hand over your gold, I'd explain, replied Bill with equal exasperation. Percy gave a little sigh and shook his head, but stepped forward and added a small handful of coins to the pile on the bed. Bill counted it quickly, frowning at the small total he arrived at. He sighed deeply. We're nowhere near close to what we need. Need for what? Demanded Percy again. Bill unfolded Ginny's letter and handed it to him without a word. He read it silently, then looked up. And you think we can come up with 15 galleons, 5 sickles, and 3 nuts? You got a better idea? We could just tell her the truth. She's going to find out about Santa sometime anyway. Charlie leveled a glare at his younger brother. Who spit in your oatmeal, huh? You want to spoil a little girl's Christmas? No, of course not, said Percy. But I think it's even crueler to get her hopes up for something that's not going to happen. You know Mom and Dad can't afford this, and you're barmy if you reckon we could scrap together this kind of gold. Thank you for your heartwarming opinion, Mr. Scrooge, spat Bill, crossing his arms. Any other enlightening insights you'd like to add to this meeting? Look, keep my money if you reckon it will help, but don't expect me to be in on this plan. I, for one, don't want to see Ginny any more disappointed than she needs to be. Reckon you can find the door on your own, Perce? Said Charlie rather icily. Yes, I believe I can, Charlie, returned Percy. Bill watched his younger brother leave the room, head held high and not looking at either one of them, then turned back to Charlie. We have 5 days until Christmas Eve. Here's what I was thinking. From his hiding place in the top of the linen closet, Fred watched Charlie round up Percy and duck into Bill in his room, closing the door tightly behind them. A few minutes later, they came back out, rummaged around for a bit, and then returned, again sealing the door tightly behind them. Fred's inner sleuth alarm started ringing big time, and he slipped from his hiding place. He wandered into the loo and opened the clothes hamper. Hey, what are you doing? You'll blow my cover, cried George, staring up at him in outrage. Shut it, Fred told him unconcerned. Something's going on, more important than listening to try and find where Mom and Dad hid the presents this year. Bill just had Charlie and Percy come in for one of those meetings again. Oh, said George, immediately jumping out of the hamper and following his twin down the hall. Silently, they both stretched out on the floor, facing each other, and put an ear to the crack at the bottom of the door. They listened without speaking to the conversation happening inside the room. only glancing up now and then to make eye contact. They had only been there for a few minutes when the sound of footsteps marching toward the door sent the two of them scampering out of the way. Percy pulled the door open, looked at them lying there in extremely incriminating positions, and simply shook his head. He stepped over them, pulled the door shut again, and hurried off down the hall without a backward glance. Strange, thought Fred. Usually at least lectured us for a minute or two. Then he pushed the thought from his mind as George was gesturing wildly, letting him know he was missing good stuff. He quickly resumed his position on the floor. 5 minutes later, Fred sat up and pushed away from his oldest brother's room, the gleam of secrets and ideas in his eyes. George, I do believe we have some planning to do. And merchandise to liquidate, agreed George, a matching glint in his own eyes. What are you two doing? Asked a voice from behind them. They both whirled to find Ron standing there, suspicion written across his freckled face. Just a little Christmas business is all, replied George quickly. And we need your help, said Fred, inspiration striking. Look, Ronnie, go gather any junk you can find in your room that you don't want anymore and meet us in the sitting room in 20 minutes, okay? Why? Asked Ron. What are you going to do to me? Why would you think we were going to do something to you? Because you always do. Well, not this time, little bro, said George swiftly. Promise, on my honor as a twin. Ron eyed them skeptically for a moment more, then shrugged and headed for his room. All right, now we just need a little outside help, said George as they hurried to their own room. Are you thinking who I'm thinking? Asked Fred with a wink. Uncle Bilius, they both cried together. Hurry up, hissed Ron, standing in the doorway of the sitting room and glancing back over his shoulder to where Fred and George were kneeling in front of the fireplace. Shut it, hissed Fred back. You're supposed to be our lookout, not the one who actually gets us caught with your yammering. I don't think you even know what you're doing, replied Ron after sticking his tongue out at Fred. You're not 12 yet. You shouldn't be using that, and you know it. Shut up, growled Fred again. George suddenly pulled his head back out of the flames and glared at both of them. Uncle Bilius said it sounds fun. He'll be here tomorrow morning to tell Mom he wants to visit us for a day or two. No thanks to you two, I might add. I could hardly hear him over all your racket. Well, it worked, though, didn't it? Said Fred with a shrug. Now we just need part 2 of the plan. Both twins looked right at Ron, who suddenly felt his insides freeze. What? He said suspiciously. We need to get all our loot smuggled outside and into the room shed without Mom noticing, started Fred. Which means we're going to need a distraction, added George. No way, said Ron at once. Being a distraction for one of the twins' projects was usually tantamount to accepting a suicide mission. Come on, Ron, it's for a good cause this time, pleaded Fred. Yeah, remember, we're being Santa's elves, threw in George. Ron wasn't exactly sure where he stood on the whole Santa issue anymore, but he supposed he could help out a bit more, for Ginny at least. Fine, what do I have to do? He grumbled. Just go in the kitchen and keep Mum busy, said Fred, putting an arm around his shoulders. Ask her anything, added George. Why is the sky blue? What she puts in the Christmas pudding? Where babies come from? Anything. Just keep her out of this room and away from the stairs. George and I will get all our stuff out to the broom shed through the front door. Got it? Yeah, Ron muttered gloomily. Why did he always get stuck with the hard jobs? With a sigh, he headed to the kitchen. That has to be the easiest smuggling mission we have ever pulled off, said George to his twin, roughly an hour later as they traipsed up the stairs to their room. I know. I don't reckon Mum left the kitchen the entire time. Ron might actually have some potential. We'll have to use him more often, added Fred. He pushed the door to their room open, then stopped short. Ron was sitting on one of the beds, looking rather green. What? They cried together, alarmed. If you ever ask me to do anything like that again, I'll... I'll hex you. Why? Asked George. What happened? I asked her, just like you said to. Asked her what? Questioned Fred. Where babies come from. And she told you? Squeaked George. Where do you think I've been for the last hour? Oh, Ronnie, said Fred, sitting down on the bed and putting an arm around his younger brother. It's a hard day when you learn the real facts of life. I reckon I'm going to be sick. I still can't believe she told you, muttered George, sitting on the opposite bed. Dad just told us this summer. We had to figure everything out on our own before that. Ron shuddered. That is the last time I ever let you use me for a distraction. Ever. Bill and Charlie left the house bright and early the next day, telling their mom they had plans and not to expect them back until dinner. Their strategy was simple. It was 4 days before Christmas Eve. There had to be some people around who could use some help with the odd task here and there and would be willing to pay them for it. It didn't matter if they were magical or muggle. Bill was of age now, so he could take whatever they earned down to Gringotts and exchange it without needing a parent there with him. So where do you reckon we should start first? Asked Charlie, hunching his shoulders deeper into his coat against the bitter cold. Let's try the Lovegoods. Mr. Lovegood used to pay me a few nuts to run errands for him when I was a kid. Maybe he'll have some jobs we could do. Charlie nodded, and the two of them set off through the snow. Uncle Bilius, are you quite sure you're up for this? These three can be a handful, Molly protested, still not completely over the shock of her uncle showing up at her doorstep and offering to take her 3 youngest sons for an overnight stay. And you aren't as young as you used to be. Molly, love, I may not be a spring chicken anymore, but I've got a few good years left in me yet. But all 3 at the same time? We promise we'll be good, Mum, said Fred, clasping his hands and batting his eyes. Perfect angels, agreed George, crossing his heart. Ron didn't say anything. He'd been avoiding his mother since their little chat the day before. Oh, I guess, but you flew them right back here if they give you a moment's trouble. Thanks, Mum, cried the twins, jumping up and down excitedly. Molly smiled. It was good to see them so happy, and heaven knew they weren't going to get much else for Christmas this year. If a trip to pad around after her bachelor uncle made them this excited, who was she to stop them? Just make sure you don't let them stay up all night, Uncle Bilius, and absolutely no sampling fire whiskey. Now, Molly, what sort of an uncle do you take me for? The sort that took Gideon and Fabian to see the whirligig witches when they were 12. We're the whirligig witches, Uncle Bilius, asked Fred. Yeah, we want to see them, added George. Over my dead body, replied Molly, planing her hands on her hips and glaring at her uncle. I promise, Molly, I will be the epitome of good judgment, and you boys will behave. Like we said, Mum, perfect angels. All right, go then, and have fun. He watched them leave the kitchen and then went back to the Christmas bread she was baking with a small shake of her head, never even noticing the detour the group took to the broom shed before port-keying away. So where do you boys want to set up shop then? Uncle Bilius asked the twins, who were surveying Diagon Alley with a shrewdness that belied their 10 years. I reckon we ought to set up over there, by Gringotts, said Fred, pointing to a place just beyond the stone steps. It's close enough to the bank people will most likely have just come from it, and have money to spend. But far enough away from the other shops we won't be competing with them, finished George. Right, boys, said their uncle with a smile. He walked over to the place they had indicated and waved his wand a few times. A small stall appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't the most beautiful thing ever produced, but it didn't need to be, and he'd never been very good at aesthetics. Thanks, Uncle Bilius, cried the twins together. Their uncle nodded, using his wand to draw up a chair behind the stall and conjure a blazing fire. You're on your own now, he said, tipping the chair back and crossing his arms, eyes already closed. Brilliant, said Fred, taking charge at once. He clapped his gloved hands together and tossed his brightly colored scarf over his shoulder. Let's set the potions and perfume on this end of the stall, the junk we're trying to sell in the middle, and the hot chocolate on the other. Ron, you can have charge of the hot chocolate. Ron eyed his older brother skeptically. Love potions? He scoffed, picking one of the small bottles up that George was unloading from boxes onto the table and reading the label. What's in these potions, anyway? He asked. That one? I think we put honey and some cinnamon in that, said George, his words coming out in small puffs from the cold. And rum extract, added George. And the perfume? Asked Ron, picking up another bottle of homemade concoctions. Rose petals, water, and some of Percy's shampoo. Ron shook his head. This stuff isn't real. It's all just rubbish. Of course it's not real, said George. We're going for pure cuteness factor here, not authenticity, said Fred, as though Ron were missing the completely obvious. It's all a matter of how you market it. Do it right, and you can sell anything. Whatever, said Ron, turning to help place the junk they'd managed to collect between the three of them on the table, seriously wondering why anyone in their right mind would want to buy any of it. Just watch, and you'll see, Fred assured him. Bill trudged wearily up the stairs toward his room, his feet dragging from a hard day's work around the village. Bill turned to see Percy standing on the landing that led to the attic bedroom he shared with Ron, looking rather hesitant. What? He said testily. He was still peeved that his younger brother had bailed on their plan. I was wondering if I could borrow Jack. I need to send something off. Bill narrowed his eyes and very nearly spat something nasty at his brother, but he caught himself just in time. He was the eldest. He was supposed to set the example, and it was Christmas after all. Yeah, I guess, he sighed. Thank you, said Percy curtly, turning quickly and taking the stairs back to his room. Bill shook his head, wondering what that was all about, then continued on to his own room. He intended to collapse on his bed and take a nice long nap, provided Charlie hadn't already beaten him to the punch and started up with his bloody snoring. Molly woke in the wee hours of the morning to the distinct feeling that something was missing. She reached for her wand on the nightstand and flicked the lamp on, then rolled over. Arthur's side of the bed was empty. She sighed and quietly rolled out of bed, pulling on her dressing gown over her nightdress and sliding on her slippers. He hadn't slept as well since the accident, and he had probably left the room so as not to keep her up. Not wanting to wake the children, she crept silently through the house, only using her wand for illumination. He wasn't in the sitting room, the bathroom, or the kitchen. He wasn't in the tiny closet off the sitting room he had crammed a desk into and used as an office. She was starting to worry a little until she glanced out the kitchen window and saw a light coming from his shed. She shook her head slightly as she grabbed a cloak off the hook by the door and stuffed her feet into Bill's boots that were standing there. The December air that met her when she opened the door was frigid, and she hurried down the path to the little shed that had become Arthur's sanctuary. Peering in the only window, she could see her husband sitting on a bench, lit by a single lamp. His shoulders were hunched, and he appeared the very picture of misery. Her heart broke. Arthur, she said softly as she pushed open the door. He looked up, wiping hastily at his cheeks. Arthur, love, what is it? She asked, sitting down on the bench beside him. She entwined her fingers through his and laid her head on his shoulder. He gestured with his free hand to a damaged sled that leaned against the wall in front of him. I picked it up on the way home from work yesterday. Some muggle had left it out with the rubbish. I thought... His voice cracked slightly. I thought I could fix it up for the twins and Ron. A few binding spells, a new coat of paint. But it's not working. Molly looked at the toy. It was very damaged. She sighed, loving this wizard beside her even more because he had tried. Okay, Arthur. No, it's not okay, Molly, he cried, looking away from her. I should be able to provide for my family. I shouldn't have to go digging through rubbish bins just to give them Christmas. I feel like I haven't given them anything. Molly felt her temper flare slightly. Arthur Weasley, you stop that right now, she ordered, turning him back to face her. You have given them everything. They have clothes to wear and good food to eat and a warm home to live in. You're sending them to the best wizarding school in the world. But more than that, they have you, a father who is kind and loving and would give up the world for any of them, and they know it. There are things so much more important than money, Arthur. I know, he sighed, but it's Christmas, Molly. I want to see looks of glee and excitement on my children's faces when they wake up Christmas morning, not stoic smiles to try and protect us. Besides, weren't you the one crying in the loo just the other day when Ginny came in with that catalog? Molly closed her eyes. She just caught me off guard, and it got me. I wish we had wonderful, nice things to give them too, Arthur. And I wish Ginny wasn't going to get up Christmas morning and have her dreams crushed. But they're good, strong kids, Arthur, and they'll be okay. Besides, they'll have presents. We're not destitute. There are the jumpers and gloves I've made them, and the books from Muriel, and you know we've made something special for each of them. Not to mention I've been cooking enough sweets and biscuits and puddings to feed a small army. Arthur finally smiled through his eyes, though his eyes remained slightly watery. We have a small army, Molly, and you wouldn't trade a single one of them for all the gold in Gringotts. Of course not. Well, they wouldn't trade you for all the Christmas presents in the world either. So why don't you come to bed, dear, and stop brooding out here in the cold? Tomorrow I'll help you with the sled. Maybe between the two of us we can put it right. He let her pull him to his feet, but then he stopped her, pulling her back to plant a kiss on her lips. Have I told you lately how beautiful you are? After giving birth to that small army you mentioned? Yes, and I love you more every single day. He kissed her again firmly. Well, my handsome prince, she said, batting her eyes at him flirtatiously as she pulled him forward by his hand. Why don't we go back upstairs and I'll give you your Christmas present a little early this year? Beautiful and brilliant, he said, finally smiling as he followed her. Bill and Charlie cooked breakfast the next morning. For some reason, their parents seemed to need a bit of a lie-in. 2 days before Christmas, Diagon Alley was alive with last-minute shoppers out looking for that perfect gift. Fred and George had chosen a good spot for their little impromptu shop, and with Uncle Bilius dozing in the background by his fire, the two of them and Ron had done a respectable business. The twins were natural-born salesmen, and so after a while Ron had pretty much left them to it, content to man the hot chocolate section and read his pile of Martin Miggs comics he'd thankfully thought to bring along. They'd sold out of hot chocolate the first day, using up all of their mum's supply. The twins had pilfered from the kitchen when she wasn't looking. Fred used a few sickles to buy some more, convinced the turnaround would exceed the cost, and the way things were going, he was probably right. George had managed to peddle most of their used goods, though not for as much as he would have liked. Fred had even charmed several middle-aged witches out on a holiday shopping spree into buying most of the love potions and perfume. He'd batted his eyes at them and flashed his most innocent grin, making them laugh with something witty he'd said. They'd call him cute and sweet, kissed and pinched his cheeks, ruffled his hair, and then opened their purses. After they'd walked away, Ron had dissolved into giggles as he watched Fred practically gag and scrub at his cheeks with his coat sleeve. You know, making money's great, muttered Fred, still looking slightly ill, but I think I'm going to have to start drawing the line at some things. Ron laughed again, feeling it was justly deserved for that stunt they'd suckered him into the other day. He still wasn't sure he could look his parents in the eyes after that little chat. Hey there, son. Ron glanced up at the voice to see an older wizard standing in front of his side of the stand. Want some hot chocolate, sir? he asked, just as George had told him he had to. Well, no. Actually, I was wondering if those were for sale. He gestured to the pile of comics at Ron's feet. Mm, no, sorry, said Ron, stepping protectively in front of his stash of beloved comics. Are you sure? My grandson loves those, and I've been hunting everywhere for them, but I can't seem to find them in any of the stores. Ron hesitated. He loved his comics. They were one of the few things he had that were his, only his. He didn't have to share them with any older brothers. But he did really want to help Jenny out as well. He was his only sister after all, and he was supposed to help take care of her. She was the only one in the family he actually got to be a big brother to. Everyone else treated him like an annoying pest half the time, but Ginny looked up to him. I'll give you 6 galleons for the lot of them, the wizard offered. Ron felt his eyes bug out. 6 galleons! That was more than they had made in the whole 2 days they'd been out there. He glanced back to find Fred and George staring at them, mouths hanging open in profound astonishment. A happy thought filled Ron suddenly. If he did this, sold his comics to this man, he would have successfully outsold the twins at their own game, and in only one transaction. Deal, he told the man with a grin. Some things were just worth it. All right, let's see what we've got, said Bill, dumping the money he'd just changed at Gringotts onto his bed. Charlie sat on the other end, eagerly leaning forward. It was Christmas Eve, and the two of them were exhausted, more exhausted than they've been before the break for the holidays. In the last 4 days, they'd worked like house elves. Crazy Mr. Lovegood had paid them to scour all his cauldrons. Some little widow lady in the village had given them some of that funny paper money Muggles used for washing her windows, all 57 of them. They'd mucked out some farmer's barn, hung Christmas decorations for the local parson, and run errands for the butcher. Charlie had even agreed, much to his chagrin, to play dress form for one of the village wives who said he was the exact build of her husband, and she just couldn't finish the shirt she was making without it. So how much do we have? Asked Charlie impatiently. 8 galleons and some change, Bill replied, crestfallen. They'd worked so hard. He thought they'd have plenty, but not knowing the exact exchange rate of Muggle to wizard money, he'd miscalculated. That's it, cried Charlie. He pushed Bill's hands out of the way and started counting again for himself. He looked up after a moment with pure disappointment written on his freckled face, having arrived at the same total as his brother. Now what do we do? He asked glumly. Tell Ginny the truth, I reckon. I suppose Percy was right. Not so fast, dearest elder brothers, called a voice from the doorway. The two boys looked up to see their 10-year-old twin brothers walking in, trailed by Ron. Do the words private meeting, stay out mean anything to you three? Bill snapped. Nope, said Fred casually. Besides, you're going to want us here, said George, as we have come to save the day. Bill shook his head and crossed his arms, glaring at them. Gave him a headache when they started doing it, finishing each other's sentences. It wasn't natural. Oh, really? And how's that? Fred pulled a bag from his jumper and turned it up over the bed. A stream of gleaming coins poured out and into their small pile. Bill's jaw dropped. Charlie's eyes popped. The twins grinned. You know that we know everything that goes on in this house, right? Said George cockily. And after hearing of poor Ginny's plight, we decided she'd need more help than you two gits could give her, added Fred. So we made some plans of our own. Bill forcefully closed his mouth. All right, you two. What did you do and how much trouble are you going to be in when it gets out? They might only be 10 years old, but they were already well on their way to becoming criminal masterminds. Yeah, added Charlie, fingering the gold suspiciously. Which bank did you rob? How could you say such things, dear older brothers? Cried Fred. You wound us, added George theatrically. I'm taking the dictionary away from you two, said Bill, You sound ridiculous talking like that. Now, seriously, where did you get the gold? We earned it, just like you. It was all perfectly legal, just so you know. In fact, Ron here, said George, pulling Ron, who had until then been content just to listen, forward. Actually made most of it. What did you do, Ron? Asked Charlie. Sold my comics, the youngest boy muttered, not used to being the center of his brother's attention. Your Martin Miggs comics, gasped Bill, but you love those. Ron shrugged, blushing slightly. Got 6 galleons for them, too, added Fred proudly. 6 galleons, cried Charlie. He suddenly turned back to the pile of coins on the bed and started counting again. Bill, he said excitedly a minute later, we're only 1 galleon, 5 sickles, and 2 nuts short now. No, you're not, said another voice from the doorway. All 5 redheads turned to see Percy standing there, pushing the door closed behind him. He looked at them all for a moment, then walked over and dumped 2 galleons into the pile on the bed. Purse? Asked Bill, eyebrows raised. I, Percy stammered, I made a trade. I did all of Walter Barfouse's holiday essays, and he sent me those, he said, looking at his feet. You did someone else's homework? Squeaked Charlie. For money, added Bill. So that's why you've been shut up in your room and borrowing my owl. He shook his head, smiling. Merlin's pants, Perce. There may be hope for you yet. He stood and wrapped his younger brother in a huge hug, which everyone impulsively joined in, leaving Percy surrounded by his brothers and blushing to the roots of his hair. The clock at the back of the store chimed 4 in the afternoon, and Mrs. Tabitha Merriweather smiled with relief. She loved her store, selling wonderful toys and games to children, and watching the smiles appear on their faces. But even she was glad to close early on this Christmas Eve. She bustled about, sweeping up the shop and restacking one of the shelves. She was just reaching to flip the sign from open to closed and lock the door when it was pushed open by 2 very breathless teenage boys. Please don't close yet, the taller one huffed, trying to catch his breath. Yeah, we need to buy something, added the other, who was most certainly his brother. Tabitha stopped, intrigued. These 2 were obviously not in the habit of frequenting toy shops. By the looks of them, they were in their late teens. The oldest one might even be of age. She had to admit she was curious what would bring 2 such boys to her shop at closing time on Christmas Eve. And what sort of toy could be of interest to 2 such strapping lads as yourselves? She asked them, leaning on the broom. This, the older one said, holding up a folded piece of parchment. We need to buy this. She took it from him, glancing at the request written in red crayon by a childish hand, and realized there was a cutout picture from one of her own catalogs taped to the bottom. It was a picture of her newest line of dollhouse. Seem a little old to be playing with dolls, lads, she said with a merry laugh. It's not for us, the younger one cried, his face scrunching up in disgust. Yeah, it's for our little sister. Neither one of you bears much resemblance to Santa. Well, we're helping him this year, muttered the younger lad. Tabitha smiled again. Very well, since it's Christmas, she said, rather taken with these 2 red-headed boys who had raced across the alley to get a dollhouse for their sister before closing time. I think I still have a few left in the back. If you'll just excuse me for a moment. Well, actually, the older boy broke in, looking rather embarrassed. We were wondering if we could buy that one. He pointed to the one in the window that was already assembled. She smiled knowingly. Let me guess, it's a surprise? They nodded. And you don't know how to put it all together properly? Again, they nodded sheepishly. Tabitha laughed. I don't usually sell the merchandise in the window until I'm out of stock in the back. But, she added quickly, seeing them share a worried glance, no worries, boys. I suppose I can make an exception. just this once, since you asked so nicely. If you'll just step up to the counter and wait, I'll collect it and be right with you." She pulled a key from her apron pocket and opened the small grate that separated the window from the rest of the shop, listening to the soft noises and whispered conversation coming from behind her as she did. The unmistakable sound of a money purse being turned upside down on the counter met her ears, and she smiled as she heard them carefully counting each nut. The boys' rather well-worn clothes and homemade hats and scarves hadn't escaped her notice either. It was obvious these boys had scraped together every last nut they had to buy their little sister her dream gift. "Here you go, lads," she said with a kind smile, bringing the large dollhouse over and setting it on the counter. "That'll be 15 galleons, 5 sickles, and 3 nuts exactly." The oldest counted the coins, most of it in nuts, and pushed them toward her, leaving only a few behind. He grinned broadly and turned the dollhouse around to get a good hold on it. But then his grin faltered when he noticed the inside. "Ma'am," he said quickly, "there's furniture and 2 dolls in here. Those cost extra, and we don't have enough to pay for them. I reckon you forgot to take them out." "No, lad," Tabitha assured him with a merry laugh. "Didn't you know about our one-day sale? Buy one of our dollhouses today, and the dolls and furniture are included at no extra cost." "Brilliant!" the younger boy exclaimed. "Ginny's going to go through the roof." "Ow, thanks," the older said, his grin returning. "My pleasure," replied Tabitha. She stood there smiling as she watched them gather up their treasure and exit the shop at the same breathless speed they'd entered. Laughing, she shook her head and then turned the sign and finished closing the shop. "One-day sale, eh?" said a voice from behind her. She turned to find her husband leaning in the doorway to the back room, arms crossed and a knowing smile on his face. "What?" she asked innocently. "I've always been a sucker for redheads, and you would have done the same thing." "Did you get it?" 4 voices cried in excited whispers when Bill and Charlie entered the twins' room. "Shh!" Charlie hissed, glaring at them. "Ginny's room is right down the hall, and she'll hear you." "Well, did you, though?" Percy asked again. "Yeah, we got it," said Bill, grinning. "Where is it?" asked Ron. "In the broom shed. We couldn't risk bringing it inside and having Mum or Dad see it." "How are you going to get it inside tonight?" asked Percy. Bill paused. He hadn't actually thought of that. He'd been so caught up in just trying to buy the thing, he'd never even given thought to how to smuggle it in the house. "Bill, brother dearest," said Fred suddenly at his side. "Have you learned nothing?" added George, appearing on his other side. "We may be young, and small, and innocent-looking." Charlie snorted. "You two were born looking guilty, and you know it." They grinned, taking it as a compliment. "Anyway, our point is," said Fred, getting down to business, "that we have wandered this house at night for years, and never once been caught." "You wander the house?" asked Bill, rather alarmed. "See, our point exactly," said George triumphantly. "If you're willing to trust us, we can promise you to get the dollhouse right where it needs to be for Ginny to find in the morning. And no one will hear a thing." Bill didn't answer right at first. Fred and George might talk like they'd swallowed flattery for dummies backwards, but they were still only 10, and there was a lot riding on this night. "Aw, let 'em do it, Bill," Charlie suddenly spoke up. "Never would have got this far without them anyway." "All right," said Bill with a shrug. The twins gave each other a high five. "But just so you know, Charlie and I are locking our door at night from now on. You two are scary." "Are we done now?" asked Ron suddenly. "I'm hungry." Everyone laughed. "Yeah, I think so," said Bill. "Come on, Ronnie. Let's go see what Mum made for dinner." Bill didn't think he'd sleep that night, despite knowing that the spell his parents had placed on the presents wouldn't activate and bring them to the foot of his bed until it sensed he was out cold. He lay awake for a long time, listening for the creak of the stairs, the swish of a door, anything to tell him that the twins had been successful. He didn't hear anything, though, and gradually his eyes closed until the next thing he knew, Charlie was ripping the covers off him and telling him to get his lazy bum out of bed. It was Christmas. Did they do it? He cried, swinging his legs out of the bed. No idea, but we're not going to find out sitting here. Bill gave a glance to the foot of his bed. There was a small pile of packages there. Jumper from Mom, homemade wallet from Dad, book from Auntie Muriel. There was a suspiciously moist package from the twins that he thought might be safer to avoid. A drawing from Ginny, a crumpled-looking brown sack from Ron. Apparently everyone had been busy trying to make Christmas a little better this year. He and Charlie pulled their Christmas jumpers on over their pajamas and then rushed into the hallway, leaving the rest of the presents for later. Percy and Ron were already coming down the stairs from their attic bedroom, both wearing their own jumpers. 2 more flights down, and the twins had joined them. Did you? George stomped on Charlie's foot swiftly, giving him a glare as the door to Ginny's room opened, and their little sister emerged. She was wearing her jumper over her nightdress and clutching a rag doll in her arms that Bill had a sneaky suspicion used to be his old teddy bear until a few days ago. It was rather worn and frayed at the edges, despite his mother's best efforts to hide it. He didn't bring it, she said softly, looking up with eyes full of tears she was trying valiantly to hold back. Bill's heart dropped, and he whipped around to glare at the twins, but was stopped by his parents coming down the stairs from their room on the 3rd floor. Ginny, love, what's wrong? His mother asked, looking just as crestfallen as her daughter. Santa didn't bring it. I was so good this year, and it was the only thing I asked for, and he still didn't bring it. Her voice caught, and she lost the battle to hold in her tears. With a cry, she flung herself into her mother's arms, while their dad looked helplessly on. As one, all 4 of their brothers turned to glare daggers at the twins. Ginny, sweetheart, said their dad, pulling the little girl from her mother's arms. Let's go down to the kitchen and have our Christmas breakfast. And then Daddy needs to talk to you for a bit, okay? His sister sniffed loudly, clutching the doll tighter, but nodded. Yes, breakfast would be good for all of us, his mom agreed, wiping at her own eyes. Still in pajamas, nightgowns, and Weasley jumpers, the family traipsed down the stairs, Bill vowing to pound his twin brothers into the ground the instant he got them away from his mother's eyes. Oh, sweet Merlin! He glanced up from his thoughts at his mother's cry, noticing she had stopped on the last landing and was staring into the kitchen below. Suddenly, an excited squeal of pure delight ripped through the morning, coming from his little sister. He brought it! He brought it! She screamed, ducking through her parents and racing down the stairs. Bill pushed forward with the rest of his brothers to see what was happening. There, resting in the middle of the kitchen table, was the dollhouse. The twins had arranged the dolls inside, so they were sitting to a handsome breakfast and tied a big red bow on the top with a note that read, To Ginevra, with love, Santa. Look, oh look, Ginny was crying, practically dancing with delight. There's the flue, and the front door opens, and... Arthur, did you? His mom asked, still clutching her heart with one hand and the banister with the other. I had nothing to do with it, his dad assured her, stunned. But how? Stuttered his mom. Bill turned to the twins, who were grinning as they sat on the steps behind him, and bowed just a little. They gave him identical thumbs up in response. Then he looked at the rest of his brothers. Charlie was watching Ginny with a huge grin plastered across his own face. Percy leaned against the banister, wearing a content and happy smile, and little Ronnie sat next to the twins, staring at his sister. After a minute, he stood up and went down to the kitchen. Hey, Jen, I got a toy order from Santa, and I reckon he might be just the right size. You want him to come visit your new dollhouse people later? Oh, would he stay to tea? Jenny cried happily. Yeah, sure, I guess. Bill suddenly became aware of being stared at, and he looked back from the kitchen to find both of his parents watching him. Did you do this? His dad asked, eyes rather moist. No idea what you're talking about, he replied, moving between them and heading for the kitchen. Yeah, Dad, he heard one of the twins say. Don't you believe in magic? The other finished, both coming from behind him. And Santa Claus, Charlie added, following the others. It is the only logical answer, you know, Percy finished, the last to pass their parents. Now, Mom, what was that about breakfast? All right, so that was Yes, Ginevra, There Is a Santa Claus by 1917 Farm Girl. And one of the things that I like most about the story, obviously, was the overall plot, really, of all the Weasley kids coming together, even at their even younger age, to actually get Ginny the Christmas present of her dreams, if you will. I thought it was really interesting to be able to see um, all of the Weasleys at a younger age. Um, so that we also got that glimpse of Bill and Charlie that we don't really get, obviously, in canon because they're both adults by that time. Um, Bill being a curse breaker, and Charlie, of course, infamously, I guess, training dragons in Romania. But I also liked the way that, um, we often see them poking fun at each other or being outright at odds. Percy being the most obvious example, or completely apart with Charlie's situation. But here we get to actually see sort of the beginnings, or the early stages of those bits of friction, and the things that do sort of separate them. Um, but we get to see them all come together, and it reinforces that idea, that obviously we see in canon. But I think this, for me anyway, brought it into a much sort of sharper relief, um, even than canon does, about the Weasley family and how tight and close they are and how supportive of each other they are. Um, I thought Jill did a great job to give them each a distinct voice. Fred and George obviously having sort of, the same voice, basically, being the twins and starting down their road, to both salesmanship and finishing each other's sentences. But all in all, I thought it was a great story for the characterization, for the plot, and ultimately, I think it was a moving story, um, especially for anybody out there who has kids, who, your kids ask you for some sort of crazy item, and trying to find a way to make that happen for them. So I was really moved by that, at least personally. You may have picked it up a couple of times between my coughing and clearing my throat. I'm sorry for that. Kind of trying to get it over a little bit of an illness here, and uh, we're at this point. I think today we are going to read. I'm going to be reading about 14,000 words for you guys. I'll try maybe not to proceed at as languorous a pace as I realized that I actually did this story. But I really wanted to do it justice, and my hope is that I will do the same, or at least adequate justice, depending on thoughts of how much justice I did to that story, to our next story of the double feature, which is 6 segments of a satsuma by Aphoride. And like I said, Laura, the author of the story, may be joining us later. I hope that she will be able to. But if she's not, time zones and obligations, everything with me here on the East Coast US and her over in the UK. My hope is that we will be able to talk with her about the story as well, and we will see. But for now, I'm going to jump into the story, 6 segments of a satsuma by Aphoride. 1. Look through the doors, out across the rolling, heaped hills, and there, between their humps, if you look hard enough, if you really, really look hard enough, there you can see whales, Dad had told me once, his hands in his coat pockets. I had squinted and squinted and squinted, searching for the elusive arc of gray, sleek bodies, and spurts of water tall and sprinkling, and frowned when I saw nothing but green grass and bubbled trees as far as the horizon. My lip wobbling, struck by the sudden thought that then, if I couldn't see them, they must all be dead. Dad had laughed later. He admitted when I was old enough I had stopped scowling about it and blushing about it, mortified and furious with my younger, simpler self. Then he had only smiled, something twinkling in the corner of his mouth, and gently corrected me. Not Whales, but Wales. Whales, I had repeated slowly and carefully, not whales. Years later, decades later, and the horizon still looks the same, really. The same hills, the same miniature church spires poking out of clumps of trees here and there, the same thin trails of muggle roads snaking through. It's familiar, and that's comforting. But, there's always a but, Mom always says, pinning Dad with a fond, pursed look, as much a joke as a warning. Somewhere, somehow, there just always is. What is familiar becomes boring, and what is boring becomes impossible. Dull, dingy, full of holes, and problems, and a tension which resonates out of your own chest, beating a steady drill of I don't want to be here, until the pattern leaches out of you, down your tongue in waspish, barbed things, and the way you shift and hide away in your room until everything closes in, and you clatter down the stairs. I want to leave, I want to leave, I want to leave, I want to leave, and outside into the fresh, wide air of the garden. Today is one of those days, but there's no real way to escape. I sit, tucked up in a wicker chair, with a trio of books and a fat, embossed notebook, a present from Aunt Daphne years ago, bought in Milan. She had told me proudly, though it had meant nothing to me, really. Ink on my fingertips and probably smudge somewhere on my cheek, watching as the peacocks strut across the lawn, bottoms swishing to and fro, hearing the Abraxan horses whinny in the paddock just behind the row of pine trees, and pretending I'm not watching Mom. She says it's fine, just the flu, nothing to worry about. And in our matching solid silences and taut smiles, Dad and I say the same thing. What if it isn't? What if the cancer's back? What if it's serious this time? Awake this time? Dormant had always been a sweet word until the diagnosis had come through. The province of the mice in the garden in winter, of the cats in the library, curled up on the windowsills. It had changed then, mutated into something strange and cruel, predatory, waiting to wake up, yawn, and stretch and damage. It had echoed round my head in the days after when I walked through the corridors at school, winding my way from lesson to lesson, numb and blind, dormant, dormant, dormant. It's a blessing, Mom had said, with her quiet, firm conviction, but Dad had still cried in his study at night, sleepless and haunted, looking more and more like the photos from the end of the war, just after, from his trial and his eventual acquittal. For now, though, we sit in quiet contemplation, the name given years ago to Mum's favorite hiding place in the garden, an old disused pagoda, bell-shaped and marbled, splashed with gray and what were now 8 blooming baby pink and blonde jasmine plants. Her wrapped in a jumper and a cloak like a blanket over her shoulders, me in my jeans and a wrinkled ink-stained shirt, and we doze and dream side by side. I'm tense and I'm loose-limbed and I want to leave, and I never want to leave, and honestly don't think I know anything anymore. There's a bowl of satsumas on the table. It had used to be apples and bananas and grapes and satsumas, but I only ever ate the satsumas, and so gradually the others dropped out. Bananas, then apples, then grapes, and now it was only the satsumas, which I ate almost religiously, absently, instinctively. And I lean forward, stretching down my left-hand side to grasp one. Digging a thumbnail in, I start to peel it. The smell, light and sweet and sharp, smoking through the air. I've had an invitation, I tell her, breaking the silence hesitantly, slowly, from a journalist. He wants to ask me about the job. You know, about me. How I got it, why I got it, my opinions and things. I stopped abruptly, awkward and my throat closed, dry and swollen. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, Mum told me, her eyes fixed on me, steady and strong. But don't let fear stop you if you do want to do it. Wordlessly, I nodded and picked at a thin vein-like string digging into the satsuma. 2. So, Padma wraps a palm around her coffee cup, steam rising from the brim in hazy, thin lines. How was the interview? I'm not sure what to say. The truth is right, the truth is good, but the truth, what is the truth? How exactly do I fit the truth? That had been nervous, exhausting, edged with a warmness I couldn't quite name, and the feverish excitement that only came from meeting someone new who instantly clicked, sparks sputtering like a match along a tinderbox. That it had been, in the end, nearly 3 hours of blindly wandering chatter, which somehow, sometime, had given him everything he wanted to know, into a single, simple sentence, into something professional. It was fine, is what I say eventually. The journalist was nice. We got on well. He didn't ask me anything too exciting. She smiles. They went easy on you then. Sent a rookie. Though I must admit, Louis Weasley is very good. Very poetic. I just nod. I don't know anything much about that, about poetry and poetics, about language and metaphors, setting words to shimmer and flutter in the breeze, cast in a kaleidoscope of colors which seemed somehow to sing. To me, it's something magical, more magical than magic, a strange, bold, whispering thing, conjured up directly from the ether of a person's soul. I'd told Louis in that interview. He laughed, clear and quiet and delighted. There had been an eyelash on his cheek, and a fine dark sweep, and a dusting of camel-colored freckles up his arms, already starting to fade after summer. How are things at home? Padma asked next, soft and gentle, and I bite my lip, a sway of irritation washing up my throat in a tall, crested swell. I swallow. They're good, I tell her, and the words taste bad, sound bad. They ring like plastic, hollow and fake. Mum's much better now, and the healers don't think it's going to come back. For a moment, Padma just looks at me. I look back, the fierce September sunlight wavering through the windows, glinting off her earrings and the necklace, a thin spun gold chain with a tiny sapphire stud. A birthday gift from Susan, which had made her blush, clasped high around her neck. It lights up the threads of yellow gold in the wooden table between us, cracked and splintered. worn down on the corners from years of use, years of wear and tear, and sunk, fat and lazy, into the teapot as it sits on the side, glass-sided and slowly massing from a light, watery sugar brown to a deep, thick, earthy color. I look back until I have to look away, feeling foolish and caught in a lie I don't know if I'd even made. Is it a lie? Are things good at home? I don't want to be there. I do want to be there. I don't know where I wanted to be. Can you even lie about things you don't know? I should get back to work, I say, tentative and hovering, waiting for permission to go. The air is getting tighter, closer, and my eyes are darting, arrow-like to the doors, over and over again. Sure, Padma agrees, and smiles a bit. Don't let me keep you. 3. The dining room is too big for just 3 of us. It echoes, ominous and deep, swallowing down every sound we make in it. Every word, every giggle, every clatter of cutlery on fine china dishes. Even the gushing trickling of wine and water slips away, quieter and quieter, until it's almost silent. It still echoes, always, a ravenous, cavernous space with its painted gray stone walls and carved flower window boxes. I hate it. I've always hated it. With its old frescoed ceiling, fat Greek cherubs and long-haired nymphs flitting through trees, bathing in a single water lily-covered pool, all under the watchful gold-cast eyes of Apollo, curls down to his neck and hyacinth blossoms in his hair. A 17th century thing, a vivid muggle work of lapis-laid hypocrisy and the huge fireplace, flanked on either side by tall, wide amphora vases with a white rose bush. It reaches back to the past, to some kind of glory left behind years ago, decades ago, before Voldemort, before Grindelwald. It was probably nice a long time ago, bright and airy, where what's hushed is loud and what's loud is hushed. Now, though, it's just cold and big and gloomy. When I was 11, before Hogwarts started, when I would have to leave the house for the first time, without my parents or aunt or uncle, when I would spend months and months in some other place surrounded by other people, Dad took me around it all, solemn-faced and jaw set. Here, he had said, pointing to the end of the dining table, is where Voldemort sat when the house was occupied during the war. Here, he had said, holding me firm at the top of the stairs to the cellars, is where the prisoners were kept. A girl and an old man, and a professor of Muggle studies. Here, he had said, his voice cracking like the chandelier on the floor, still there, shattered and broken, diamonds scattered like daisies across the marble. Here is where my Aunt Bella, your grandmother's sister, tortured Hermione Granger and tried to kill Harry Potter. Here, Mum had told me later, holding my hand and whispering, conspiratorial and with a note of pride, warm and red, running through her voice, is where your dad lied to Voldemort to save Harry Potter. Then, though, with Dad, I'd stood there and looked out at it, at the faded velveteen curtains, their tassels frayed at the edges, at the white-sheeted chairs and the tables, the dust-coated candelabras and brackets on the walls, the big broken chandelier in the center of it all, dents in the floor underneath it, fractures racing away through slabs of stone, metal flattened and twisted, sparks from wand fires, spell fires scorched in black on the frame, and felt a sudden urge to say something. Something. Anything. I said nothing and thought only Voldemort. Voldemort. You've been getting a lot of letters lately, Dad observes, and I still, my muscles coming slowly to a halt, holding firm. A tremulous and tiny pair of invisible hummingbird wings, stutter fluttering nonstop as I search my blank white cast mind for something to say. Doe-like, I blink 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, startled and herded, swiftly, neatly into silence. It barricades me in, a big, black, looming specter, and I look down, away. There's a sudden twist in my gut and a soft, acrid guilt leaking into my stomach, making my chicken and tarragon-flavored throat dry and sting. I haven't lied, wouldn't lie. What would be the point? What would it do? Nothing, nothing, and more nothing. Apart from, perhaps, a thick cloud layer of disappointment which would linger for days around my parents. Never rumbling or sparking, but simply sadly present. It's just that some things, when they're new, are sweetest when they're private. Some people, when they're new, are bravest when it's private. Secret, not secrets. Yeah, I say, there's nothing to be afraid of, I tell myself, in Mum's voice, that stern sigh voice she uses when sharing wisdom, her hands pressing on both of mine as though to imprint it through the skin. It isn't bad, isn't dangerous. The journalist from my interview. He owled me a couple of days after to ask about, and I gestured vaguely, swallowing. It went from there. It. Something. It. Dad nods, a small hum of understanding buzzing out of him. He takes a sip of water, clear and still, and sets the glass down carefully. That's nice, he says, and there's a ripple in the way he says it which tells me that he's remembering the loneliness of my childhood, when I ran through the garden with the butterflies in endless races I always won, and all those long, studious solitudes in the Hogwarts library until Albus Potter had sat down in front of me and declared, matter of fact and oddly shy, "You need friends, so I'm going to be one." It's my fault, Dad had always felt, and the words are easy to read in the crinkled frown and the hunching slope of his shoulders whenever he thought it. The words too heavy and too true to say. It's good, I murmur, giving him a smile. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Dad's mouth curls at the corner. A joke's coming, even if he is a Weasley. My fingers smell of satsumas and clementines, orange and sweet. That twin tangy sugar taste lingering on my tongue as I sift through the mess of peel and rind left behind. Romance, Albus Potter declares, is dead. I don't look up. Linnea is laughing. I can hear her quietly sniggering behind a cushion, the fabric muffling it, hollowing out the sound so it's the only high light notes which get through. You're both awful, Albus mutters, but it's a half-hearted attempt to be sulky and fails to clear the first hurdle. But Linnea cuts back, quick and rolling through her Cardiff accent, importantly not dead, unlike romance. Popping open a button on my shirt cuff, in and out, then in and out, then in and out, again and again, I'm staring, vacant and vapid, fixed at a random point on the floor, where the color of the carpet has faded from a deep sea blue to a lighter, paler thing, white-tipped and worn through. It's a surreal thing, staring like that, simultaneously aware and unaware of it, possible and impossible to look away. Tiredness crashes, wave-like, onto me, and I sigh, mouth closed, eyes closed, letting it drop down to soak me. Last night I had sat at my desk for hours, suddenly wordless, voiceless, thoughtless. Nothing seemed right. Everything I tried to write sounded wrong, silly and childish, overly blunt or too serious, too poetical, comically forced, as though I was trying to be someone else, use someone else's mouth and tongue and mind to say what I wanted to say. Really, though, I hadn't known what to say, or how to say it. Crucial things in a letter, I thought. Blank, mindless thoughts. Beige thoughts, like tepid, milky tea. In books, in plays, everyone knows when the romance starts, when the first stirrings of something gentle and tender start to flower, budding green and pink-lipped in eyes and on fingertips, where skin brushed skin and smiles bloomed on cheeks, hidden and coy. Everyone knows, everyone sees it. It's there, bright as day, and everyone in the audience smiles with them, impatient to get to the end when he takes her hand and leans in for that first tremulous kiss. Everyone knows in books, in plays, in Muggle films. No one ever knows in real life. It's nothing like in books. Hey, Scorp. Albus throws a segment of satsuma at me. It hits my shoulder, bouncing dully into my lap. Idly, I pick it up and eat it, teeth pricking and bursting the membrane, flooding my mouth with sweet, water-thin juice, sharp and sour and sweet. Lewis mentioned you the other day at the Burrow, he said. Mum was saying how you and Linnea should come for one of the family lunches tomorrow. You know, ones where Uncle Ron barbecues and Uncle Charlie tells him he's doing it wrong and nearly sets us all on fire. Well, Lewis chimed in to say that you definitely should, that if I didn't invite you, he would. So he finishes, thoughtfully plucking the stem off a plump cherry, skin polished smooth. Looks like you're not getting out of this one. Lewis always gets what he wants. Comes with being charming, with a sexy accent. Oh, I shrug a little, licking the satsuma juice off a finger. I hadn't noticed. Half a lie is better than none. How could I not have noticed? When he had sat there for our interview at the 5 subsequent coffee catch-ups afterwards. Enough of a twist to the way he sounded out vowels, O's, and I's. How on a rare occasion he'd roll an R, just enough so that it stood out. 7 years at Beauxbatons, speaking in mangled franglais at home. The language is their own melting pot in his head, cross-linked in ways I could never understand, and that was all he had to show for it. A French lilt when he spoke, which had never quite left. And a flat in Luxembourg, as Albus had helpfully told me in a recent flu call. Mainly used for quiet weekends with freshly baked bread and slow-sipping summer wines, and wildly competitive FIFA tournaments. Can't imagine you would do, Captain Focus, Albus grins at me. But the way he lifts his eyebrows and smirks, he looks unnervingly like his mother. He stops grinning approximately 8 seconds later, and I smack him full face with a pillow. I don't say anything, but I wonder. I wonder whether maybe I had noticed, just hadn't noticed that yet. Maybe. 5. One arm dangling out of the window, a leg skipping along the floor, toes just touching, socks dragging through the thick, fluffy carpet. The cool glass of the window sinks through my hair to my skull, to my brain inside, not yet warmed by the weak sky-blue tinted sun. There's a breeze, fresh and cool, washing over my face, fingers too small to ruffle the pages of my book, and still clarity escapes me. I'm not used to this kind of wool-stuffed feeling, scattered and messy, always jumping back to something else, someone else. I'm not the kind of person who sits and skywatches for hours for a single speckled owl. I've never been that kind of person, been the kind of person who smirks behind a textbook while Albus falls head over heels for a girl in a lemon yellow dress or a boy with lavender hair. I'm not turned or tumbled or swooning with delight, heart thudding and flush, scrawling lovelorn poetry on scraps of parchment I never send. Just, perhaps, a little discombobulated. DISCOMBOBULATED. Below the window, the jasmine vines are green and smooth, laden down with leaves which rustle and shiver in the breeze, whispering when I wave a hand through them, like a boat through the sea, lazy and thoughtless. There aren't any flowers. They'll blossom, sunshine yellow and star-shaped, in winter, winding into my room on the stiff winter wind, leaving me warm and cold at the same time, the heady, spiced scent overlaying the clear-headed burst of frost. They'd always been my favorite. My flowers, mine. So much so that I'd cried as a kid when my parents had sighed, tutting and clicking, when they'd seen the vines creeping up over the open windowsill, tumbling like long arms down the window seat and onto the floor. I'd sulked for days until Mum brought me a bowl of satsumas and jelly, and a single purple-pink orchid to look after. Now the orchid sat on the mantelpiece in my room, suited and booted in a green glass vase which glimmered. Louis likes orchids, though his favorite flowers are sunflowers. He told me that on our most recent, eighth, eighth and longest, eighth and dinner-esque coffee catch-up. I'd come home and stared at the sunflowers in grandmother's walled garden for a full 25 minutes, hands in my pockets for fear of doing something stupid, like cutting one down, before walking away, tumbled and turned and discombobulated. DISCOMBOBULATED. Dear Scorpius, I traced the letters on the piece of parchment sticking out of the pages of the book, traitorously familiar and sticking my eyes to them. Dear Scorpius, dear Scorpius. The sweep of the S, the looped hood of the A, and the flicked dot above the I. Sunshine on white blonde hair, banks of tall pointed pine, a long walk once, and your hand in mine. Poetry, I now know, is more powerful than I'd thought, more magical, more mysterious. Like a code you can't decipher, but where it's so intricate, so beautifully made, you sigh and smile nonetheless, understanding nothing. Ignorance is bliss, only it's not. Sometimes I wish I'd been a Gryffindor. I don't tell either Mom or Dad this, though I think they wouldn't mind. But sometimes I wish I'd been a Gryffindor, so I had a kind of well to tap into, a mantra to repeat over and over again, to remind myself of what I am, what I have, even if I don't think I am or think I have it. It'd have been easier, I think, if I'd been braver, winding my way through school, head up and chin high, hearing the hisses of Death Eater and murderer, coward, Death Eater following me down the corridors, snake-like and armored. It'd be easier to listen to people twice my age, 3 times my age, tell me how I can't do my job, shouldn't do my job because I'm an agent. For what, no one ever says, because my dad means I'm incompetent to do it. I'm not my father, I'd shout if I was braver, stand up and scream it so everyone heard. I'm not my father. The power of youth is in being better than their parents, Dad had told me once. I'd always thought it was the power to change things. Change for the better, Louis had said, our 10th coffee catch-up in Luxembourg, surrounded by pigeons and spindly metal tables. Swinging my legs out of the window, so I sit half in and half out, balancing uncomfortably on the stone ledge, my feet buried in jasmine creepers, I take a breath and flip through the book to the letter, holding it fast to the page. Change for the better, I think, and smile. 6. Seagulls squawk, freewheeling in long, languid banking sweeps, cartwheeling over sprays of salt water, beaks of full fish, their gray-splashed wings outstretched and casting shadows on the sand far down below, passing overhead like quick, noisy clouds. The beach is quiet, abandoned in the drizzle of a fierce summer rain, light and drenching, trickling down my back in tiny, slender rivers, drop by drop. Should be cold, should be making me shiver, shudder and wish, wistful and downcast, of warm fireplaces and climbing orange-red fires, slowly lifting water off my skin, mugs of hot chocolate, thick and creamy radiating in between my hands, lulling me gently toward sleep. It should be, but instead I'm thrumming, heart-kicking and jumping, filled with a nervous excitement which bubbles and boils in my stomach. I want to run. I want to leave. I want to stay. I want. Louis is next to me, almost shoulder to shoulder, and we're walking down the beach. almost out of sight of the house, both bareheaded and umbrella-less and stupidly unthinking. Rounding a corner, we're hidden from view of the house by a rising cliff face, carved out over years and years by the sea, rough and scarred, pebbles and lumps of rock littering the soft, sludgy sand underfoot. I stumble. Lewis laughs a bit and grabs my arm, fingers locked around my wrist. My heart skips a beat. So cliche, so poetic, so true. It's my turn then, and I lace our fingers together, quick and easy, and don't look at him. I don't want to see if he hates it, if he didn't think that this is how it would go. I'm too afraid. Change is better, I remind myself, the words sounding foolish, fleeting, and weak. Change is better, but does that mean this change in particular? We stop, Lewis tugging on my hand to pull me to a halt, and then there's a line of warmth running down the whole length of my side, from shoulder to hip, and he's there, right there, closer than he's ever been before, with his head on my shoulder, dripping water onto my coat. Wet hair slick and straight and shining, and I can hear how he breathes, feel how he smiles, somehow. In front of us, the sea is grayscale, flecks of green and blue here and there, like flashes of color on a raven's wings, and it rocks to and fro and to and fro in a gentle, constant tick-tock, like a clock in a hallway reverberating through the whole house. A white sail flutters on the horizon, minuscule and faint, a spot against the hazy white-gray blue of the sky, the sun washing it all in a thick yellowish glow. It's tranquil and peaceful and oddly comforting, and in that moment I find something like power, something like bravery. The power of youth, Dad had said. He hadn't said how it was strange, quieter than expected, determined and relaxed with a certainty born from hesitancy, from a possibility of better, something different, sweeter, like swapping satsumas for clementines. Is it my turn now to be brave, to ask for something different? How are you meant to do this? How do people find romance, get it, and tame it? Mold something beautiful out of a handful of sounds and a crush of letters? How are you meant to explain something which feels like nothing like how people tell you it should feel? A storm of butterflies in your stomach. Albus. I just knew, like I'd been struck by lightning. I just knew. Dad. It grew, slow and steady, rooting itself deeper and deeper until I couldn't remember a time without it. Mom. And me, a sickly sweet taste at the back of my throat, the sudden thought of what it would be like to kiss him, the stupidly unthinking thought that I didn't want to let go of this hand, those moments spent in front of the sunflowers, imagining cutting one for him, planting it for him, daydreaming of evenings in front of crackling fires, sitting with him on the window seat, legs over the edge, surrounded by spirals of perfumed flowers, basking on the veranda with Mom in cups of bone china tea, Darjeeling with milk and half a sugar, sitting in the dining room, me and Dad and Mom and him, and somehow the laughter never sunk in, always bouncing off, ringing round like bells, bright and cheerfully clattering. First love is a rush, a wild thing you fall into head first and drown in seconds. It pulls you under, sirenesque and strong, and it leaves you with a swimming head, bruised heart, and blackened, blue-tipped fingers. Maybe it isn't love, I had thought. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's just a different kind of friendship. Or maybe it's not. I don't know. Not yet, anyway. Do you want to get dinner sometime, I say, and it's easier than I ever thought it would be. Is this what it is to be brave? To hold your voice steady even as your heart pounds and you think your palms are sweating, impatiently terrified of what happens next? I risk a look at him, just to see, just to see. He's smiling that glitter-eyed blue hydrangea smile, blossoming slow and soft with his bubbled gilet unzipped. His yellow checked shirt clinging to his skin, dyed halfway translucent. The sun is shining his hair up in silver water gold spikes, the shaved sides fuzzy and white like a broken radio. Time stands still. Yeah, he says quietly, watching me. I'd like that. I still don't know what the power of youth is. Is it being better than our parents? Is it the natural cyclical change we bring? Is it the drive and determination? Is it the how are we there, free of the scars of our parents have? Free to look forward and further, to run that bit closer to the horizon? I don't know. I think I'll never know, and that's okay. Sun sinks in the sky, falling in an elegant curving arc, drowning, drowning in the sea, black gray green and lapping at our feet, sloshing up and over into our shoes, drenching socks and toes, wrinkled from the water, and so very, very cold. It stopped raining, and the onrushing night is cold and clear and glass glittering. Sunshine on white blonde hair, banks of tall pointed pine, a long walk once, and your hand in mine. So that was 6 segments of a satsuma by Aphoride, who it looks like unfortunately is not able to join us this evening, where she is this afternoon, here where I am. But if you have ever read any of her stories before, you know what a great way with words, I guess, to use a cliche expression, Laura has with descriptions in particular. Any description that she writes, it not only paints that perfect image in your mind, but it's really refined, with efforts to get the perfect color, the perfect scent, the perfect taste. And we see that, of course, throughout this story, primarily involving Scorpius and Lewis, that we get obviously a lot of participation from Albus and from Scorpius's parents, Draco and Astoria. But we see so much of that strong description. And one thing that I thought was particularly good about this story was how artfully the emotions were written. I think we needed to, because there was not a whole lot of direct dialogue, which jived very well with Scorpius's characterization. We needed to feel what he was feeling, both when he could feel, when he wasn't sure what he was feeling, um, when he was feeling, obviously. And I thought she really captured that, along with this characterization of Scorpius as this kind of shy, very unsure character. Throughout the story, there were some lingering mysteries about what was going on with Astoria, what was going on with Lewis, what was Scorpius's job, and a couple of those got tied up. I think the only one that's not explicitly tied up in the story was Astoria, who, if depends what you side with as far as what is canon, what's not canon. We would believe that the cancer came back, at the very least, by the end of this story. But I found it nice how kind of those 3 mysteries also weaved through the story, which brought it to a conclusion sort of in total, with the final shot we got of Scorpius and Lewis, seeming to have all of what was written in that poem. the pines. I don't recall if they were explicit, but that's what I imagine anyway. The rain going away and the sunshine, you know, shining down on the pair of them as they are taking that long walk, hand in hand. And so I thought the story was just really well written. It's no surprise, like I was saying, to anyone who's read Laura's work before, the precision and artfulness, and dare I say, poeticism of the way that she writes and can write. And it does not look, like I said, like she is going to be able to join us, unfortunately. I know that we've had a few people with congratulations and props to our authors in our live feed alongside the stream here. And my certainly my congratulations go out to both Jill, aka 1917 Farm Girl, and Laura, aka Aphoride, for the exceptional stories that they've written, for the honor that they were given by their fellow members of having their stories recognized for our double feature to close out 2018, as well as for my pleasure in being able to read these two exceptional stories, which, you know, we have so many wonderful authors on the archives. It's tough to keep up with all of them, but these two, as the other Fic Night stories, have brought me a lot of pleasure to read. I think they're absolutely exceptional, and I'd encourage anyone watching, member or non-member, to go out and check out both of these authors and our other Fic Night authors on our archive at archive.hpfanfictalk.com. It's a fun way, a double feature, to close out the year 2018. And for now, I'll see you in 2019. I hope you have a happy new year wherever you may be. And this is Kevin, aka Tidal Dragon, on behalf of hpfanfictalk.com, signing off.